Relationship matters.
I'm Tori Bedford. Tonight on Greater Boston, Boston Mayor Michelle Wu joins me on how she and the city are working to address the issue of homelessness and addiction in the area known as Mass and Cass, and what it's all meant for the people who've been forced to leave the area. Then later, a trip back in time through the work of American icon painter John Singer Sargent, whose work is now on display at the Museum of Fine Arts. It's been more than a week since the city cleared tents from Mass and Cass, making encampments illegal in Boston and moving dozens of people who'd been living there into temporary shelter. But several others who'd been living in the area have ended up elsewhere. That includes the nearby emergency room at Boston Medical Center, where hospital officials had to increase security. Last week's clearing is part of a new approach Boston Mayor Michelle Wu pledged to take a few months back. It's all just the latest in a long line of efforts from Mayor Wu and her predecessors to address the broader issues of homelessness and addiction that have consolidated in the area. Problems have persisted since the closure of Long Island Bridge cut off access to addiction treatment on the island. Mayor Wu joins me now to discuss, along with Tanya Del Rio, director of the city's coordinated response team. Thank you so much, both of you, for being here. So, I was there, you were there at the beginning of the month. You cleared, I think, about 75 tents, moved about 90 people into shelters or other temporary housing. Where are we since then? What is kind of the latest on Mass and Cass?
In some ways, this has been a now multi-year progression, even within our administration, of ensuring that we could build up the right infrastructure with housing and supports and medical care and treatment, as well as the processes to move people along that spectrum as they can further hold down a job and improve their health and get on that journey to full recovery. And so we have felt very good about what we've seen in the last several weeks. It's been great ensuring that people who have been connected to shelter or low threshold housing continue to work with case managers, and everything is a little bit seasonal as well, and so we feel very confident that this is an approach that we'll be able to sustain over the long run. But really, we're prepared for this winter, and then we also have plans going so we can be ready when in spring and summer the weather warms up again.
Okay, this is, a lot of people have been moved into shelter from this, right? I think last time you did this, like a clearing of a much bigger size, but something of this size, was in 2022, early 2022, and there was a big emphasis on housing. I think there were 6 low-threshold sites that were created. You moved some, like nearly 200 people into permanent housing, and that took a long time, but it was working. Why this new approach? Why this urgency, when the housing isn't available, to still clear and move people into shelter?
Well, on that front, it's actually been the same approach and building on it. And so I know Tanya has all the numbers. So it's actually not that different in terms of people getting connected to the exact placement that they needed, and us doing whatever we can to expand the spaces that are available. Every single person placed was after weeks or sometimes months of conversations about their specific health needs and other challenges that they might be facing, and then trying to connect them to that. We still have all that infrastructure from January of 2022. This was really 2 weeks into my administration. The very first thing we took on was understanding what the need was, and then a month into the administration, building the team to be able to implement a major housing surge and shifting everyone. What we didn't have, what's new about this approach, is that we now have the ability to respond immediately with a law that had required a 48-hour notice period to engage with anyone about tents after they've been placed in services. Now it's much more immediate, and there's not a 48-hour waiting period, and so we can respond rather than kind of sort of following folks around and encouraging. And now it is all the pieces working together, but we have been focused on low-threshold housing and shelter and what uniquely suits each individual's needs.
Is there more low-threshold housing, though?
It took a lot of preparation to make sure we were able to target the existing resource, as well as we could. So there was a lot of conversations of understanding the community that was spending time at Atkinson Street, and understand that the majority were not in fact unhoused people. They either had housing or somewhere to stay, but were frequenting the area for other reasons. So when we were able to understand who was it that needed placement in a low threshold space or in a shelter, we were able to case manage individually. So just to provide the numbers, out of the 102 people that were placed within that week when we closed the encampment, 73 were indeed placed in a low threshold unit, the same as were available in 2022. So you have 5 of them plus 1 that was stood up temporarily. People that were sent to shelter, 20 people were sent to shelter. 13 of them were already utilizing shelter, but also maintaining a tent outside. So they went back and discarded their tent. And then 3 people were sent to specialized shelter that were best for them. So we had 1 youth going into youth shelter, and then 2 people who went to DMH shelters because they had special mental health needs. 7 friends and family reunification. So the bulk of our placements indeed were in those same programs that we used in 2022 that have been crucial and really life-saving for people to start on that journey towards permanent housing.
Okay, I guess one of the biggest or notable differences in the discussions that the City Council was having prior to their vote was just about enforcement and how, Police Commissioner Michael Cox said that because of their constitutional rights, the police were not allowed to go and go into people's tents and arrest them inside of the tents or enter their tents without a warrant. And so by removing the tents, they were saying that it would make it easier for people. We spoke to Cassie Hurd, who is let me get her actual title, but she works with Material Aid Advocacy Organization. She's, I think, the executive director. We spoke to her, and she was kind of reflecting a lot of concerns that a lot of advocates have just about the arrests, right? I mean, this is something that is a part of the ordinance, and this is just a clip from what she had to say. What are your concerns for the next, by the time that I get to talk to them, or within the next couple of weeks or the next month, right? What are some kind of the concerns that you're thinking about after this?
The disconnection from care, right? The overdose risk only increases, as people are disconnected from their communities, from care, from those who can respond if needed. That a significant number of people, or even if one person gets picked up because of this ordinance, right, as a result of the action Mayor Wu.
You mean arrested?
Yes.
Yeah.
Both Mayor Wu and I will say the City Council, right, approved this, that can have deadly consequences, if not just be counterproductive towards people moving forward. And, in terms of housing, in terms of jobs, even in terms of accessing some treatment, having that Corey there, and also just extremely traumatic for people.
So how would you respond to those concerns? I think she named a couple of things. One is the displacement. I talked to a psychologist who works with folks at Mass General Hospital, who is also concerned about finding people. And you've worked with so many great groups, Victory Programs, Elliott House. I mean, all of these great caseworkers, JRI, who have been able to work with people. That's been a concern I've heard from a lot of people. And she also talked about arrests, right? Like this risk, this heightened risk of arrest, which is a part of this ordinance, right? It's written into the law.
Well, the ordinance was always one piece of needing to ensure that all parts of our response, public health, housing, treatment, community partners, public safety, we're all on the same page. And the rest, all of the other pieces have been moving forward as well. To date, there have been no arrests under the ordinance whatsoever. And all throughout the moving period, over the 3 days where folks were connected to placement, because there were so many months of conversation and relationships and, again, individualized conversations about everyone's needs, it was more a matter of making the move than needing to persuade or coerce anyone, because it was a relationship that we were working on the foundation for a long time for. But Tanya and her team have been on the ground 24/7 for some time, so she'd have much better.
Yeah, and I can add that once people go into the low threshold sites, we do have a report on the website that people can look at. They actually become more connected to care. So when they're living on the street, outreach teams, whether it be medical care or caseworkers or anyone that's doing street outreach, they spend a lot of time trying to locate people. I've certainly lived that myself. Now when they're in a site, they spend less time trying to locate them and more time actually providing care. And so we've seen that the people that are at those low threshold spaces are increasing their uptake of mental health care, as well as just primary care and addiction treatment. So, and it makes sense. Like if you're living on the street, you're trying to survive. So that's not where you're putting your focus on, seeing your therapist, etc. Once you're in a space where you have time to reflect and kind of engage in that, you do. And so we think that housing and shelter are in fact a step towards progress and stabilization for all of those folks that we worked with.
And the move, the placement, and the sort of what was seen most visibly over the course of the last week or so wasn't the end of the relationships that had been built up over so long. Tanya and her team and our public health workers and our community partners continue to work with those individuals and provide case management in all of those placements and building on what we know every single person needs to be able to take that next step forward.
Yeah, just if I can add, we had a chance to visit people at the 727 Mass Ave space, and we plan on visiting them at the other spaces. And just within a day or two, the physical changes and the smiling that you saw in people was, it's beautiful to see. And I do agree with Cassie that if people are going to be, carelessly moved along from where they're living, there is trauma involved. In this case, what we received from people were hugs and joyful crying because they wanted to get out, and many of them told us that they had felt chained to the street and had found it difficult to get out even though they wanted to stabilize. So once we were providing that message of this encampment's closing, let's plan together, they did, and they are much more stable even a day or two after. So I'm like excited for them.
Why does there need to be a legal requirement for people not to have, why do tents need to be illegal for people to be able to get into shelter? If shelter was available, and the city says that shelter has never not been available, why did you need to bring in increased police enforcement and make tents illegal in order for people to take those options moving in with family or moving into shelter that were already available to them?
What we heard on the ground over and over again from residents of the encampments, from public health outreach workers who were there every single day, and from the Boston Police Department street outreach team was that it's a different dynamic when it's very large-scale crowds of people together, those who have nowhere else to go because they are living in those tents, and then others who are coming into the area on a daily basis who do have housing and might be seeking community, but also some folks who are not in need of housing and in fact are there to engage in drug trafficking or sometimes even worse. It was creating an environment where there was an increase in violence and violent incidents that were reported, and a feeling that people had to, at the same time as there being some elements of community, also some elements of needing to fend for themselves and ensure they were protected. And as people were leaving behind tents that they no longer needed, we also had, Commissioner Cox had showed me the types of items for personal protection that were also left behind because they would not be needed in low-threshold housing or shelter, of the bats and knives and,
they're not allowed.
And weapons. And
you're not allowed to have a knife, right?
And those were used, unfortunately, all too often to create an environment that was not safe for everyone.
And you said there have been no arrests in connection to the ordinance. Is that a differentiation from, I know there's been this emphasis on arresting the people who are preying on the people at Mass and Cass, and then protecting the people who are being preyed upon, and that differentiation is made, on a case-by-case basis. But have there been arrests made in connection with these allegations of drug trafficking and sex trafficking, or people, kind of within that community who are not then moved along or placed into shelter? How was that? How did that work out?
So we had created a list of people who had engaged with us and told us that they were in need of housing, and those are the people we focused the resources on. In parallel, Boston Police has always been conducting enforcement in the area and in the surrounding neighborhoods around all of those criminal activities that you were talking about. They have increased their presence. However, they haven't made any arrests for refusing to remove an encampment as the ordinance spells. They have made warrant arrests and investigations of all of those kinds, but not for the ordinance. Does that?
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess just so I was looking, and this is like a little wonky, but in the penalty section of the ordinance, in this amended version that the City Council passed, they reference this law that basically says, a substance such as drinking or possession of alcoholic beverages, a person profane or obscene language. It cites, doing these things, you might be arrested without a warrant by an officer authorized to serve criminal process in the place where the offense is committed and kept in custody until he can be taken before a court having jurisdiction of the offense. So does that mean that people can be arrested without a warrant for drinking or swearing publicly, and this is part of the ordinance, this is in the language of the ordinance, and then held before an arraignment in jail? Is there any kind of like arrangement that's happening right now with the sheriff and the BPD and the city to process people that are out, publicly using or doing any kind of public disturbance? Is that something that the police are targeting right now?
There really has been no, the ordinance is now law, and the commissioner and the department and the entire city are eager for every single neighborhood in the city and every single street in each neighborhood to have that baseline of safety. And so wherever laws need to be enforced, they will continue to be enforced. But there really is no effort, now that this ordinance is law, to try to, circumvent or, categorize an arrest this way versus that way. So it's more that there hasn't been a need for this, for this particular type of enforcement, because most of the people who were living in tents and encampments were placed, and then everyone else, it's not that there have been new tents popping up all over the city or anything like that. There's been a visible coordination. We now have mobile outreach teams to reach people throughout the city, because the resources are freed up from having to monitor and work to save lives and keep the peace and ensure safety in one area with so many people concentrated at Mass and Cass. Now that that dynamic is different on the street, the resources are available citywide to make sure we can get people what they need.
But the enforcement is also happening citywide. I think about two things. I think about Commissioner Cox in the City Council hearing talking about how police were very reluctant to enforce when the tents were up, and they wanted this ordinance to be able to enforce the law, to enforce this, to be able to go ahead and target those people that they were perceived as a danger. And then I also think about how in 2021, your predecessor, acting Mayor Kim Janey, she established the courtroom at the Suffolk County Jail, where people were held pre-trial and kind of processed, and the goal of that was to get people into detox or rehabilitation. Is there any kind of component or something like that? Because now I guess I'm thinking, if the police were resistant before the ordinance and now they have this ability, would we see more arrests, and would there need to be some kind of central booking situation that was set up like we had at the Suffolk County Jail previously?
Well, one, I'll say that, again, when the dynamic is different and the tents aren't there to shield different types of activity that were happening, whether it's drug trafficking or human trafficking, it is a different, there's just less to try to enforce around it, as so far as we have experienced it as a city, and we hope that dynamic continues. We have set up, there will not be there's been no conversations whatsoever about recreating any kind of centralized court system like that. I know the Suffolk County District Attorney is continuing and has expanded his services over sentencing program, which provides diversion opportunities for individuals who are in need of treatment and recovery. And then lately, we have actually implemented a central booking arrangement with the city and our Boston Police. That's been something that has been in conversation for a very long time. Basically what it means is that anyone who's taken into custody, rather than being held in the individual police precinct closest to where they were taken into custody, where our precincts aren't set up with food or medical care or really, arrangements for that, folks are taken now to Suffolk County, Nashua Street, taken to the House of Corrections, where the sheriff already has all of that in place and all that infrastructure there.
Okay, so that's kind of.
But that's separate. I guess it's related in that therefore, there's less risk that someone who was taken into custody might suffer medical consequences because of the lack of care in police precincts. They're now taken somewhere where there will be care, but that was in place, for every situation, not just Mass and Cass.
Oh, okay, so that was pre-existing, and there hasn't been like an uptick in arrests for people brought to that place since this.
What it looks like on the ground is we have the street outreach public health workers, including partner agencies and the Boston Police. They're having conversations 3 times a day, 8 in the morning, 4 in the afternoon, 12 midnight, and alerting each other of where they're seeing congregation, where they're seeing people in need of outreach or in need of an offer of services. 3 times a day and throughout the day via radio, those conversations are happening. So whenever we do see that need, outreach workers are being dispatched first. Now, people are very smart and they understand that the ordinance is in place. So with that messaging of, well, we're offering you shelter in, and you know that now it's not possible to set up a campsite or a large encampment like we had throughout the year. People have been taking us up on the offer a lot more frequently than they did before when they were in a large group with that peer pressure in that situation.
Is there a plan to continue? I know you're saying this is an expansion of what you were doing before, which was really working, but it takes time, right? Is there a plan to create more permanent housing for people? I mean, getting almost 200 people into permanent, and really, really quickly, because we are technically out of time.
So those 200 units actually weren't permanent housing. Those were low-threshold transitional sites with
I'm saying
wraparound medical care.
172 people, I think you got it.
Yeah, out of that into the
Take
next
credit
step.
where
Yes.
it's due.
Yeah, absolutely. And those were actually sites that are run throughout the state. So some of that was in Boston and some of it's outside. We now have had partnership from the state to expand and replicate some of those low-threshold transitional sites in other cities as well. And everywhere we're seeing the need for more permanent housing, but that's something we'll continue to advocate
That
for.
would be a continuing conversation. All right, thank you so much, Mayor Wu. Tanya Del Rio, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Then, iconic American artist John Singer Sargent is best known for his prolific portraits of high society, but a new exhibit at the Museum of Fine Arts focuses on the fashion he chose for his subjects, from the opulent to the ordinary to the outright scandalous. GBH News' Jared Bowen takes us on a tour.
Painter John Singer Sargent had a way of rendering the architecture of an arm, a splaying of the fingers, or an elevation of the chin so that we could know exactly what he saw inside and out.
There's some people who recalled that they saw a little bit too much and that it was a little bit nervous-making to go sit for Sargent.
Sargent was an American artist who became the darling painter of the upper classes on both sides of the Atlantic from the late 1800s through the turn of the century. His sitters had noble lineages and cascading jewels and paid 6 figures in today's money for the privilege of being painted by him.
He decided how they were going to pose, what they would wear in many cases, and the backdrop and setting.
Erica Hirschler is the curator of Fashioned by Sargent, a new exhibition at the Museum of Fine Arts Boston that follows the threads of Sargent's process, even reuniting portraits with the original garments his sitters wore, like this opera cloak enveloping Lady Sassoon.
He takes it and he pulls it across her body and he turns out the lapel so that you get this great swoop of pink satin across her body. And it makes for a much more interesting painting.
While the society portraits may have been Sargent's bread and butter, his true nourishment came from society's fringes. He relished painting bohemian poets, playwrights, and musicians. And here, Sargent was as drawn to Dame Ellen Terry as Lady Macbeth as he was to her costume.
The costume is covered with beetle wings, which reflect the light and sort of shimmer blue-green. And the excitement of being able to paint something that was so unusual appealed to him.
I think there's a lot of Sargent's biography lurking in these paintings.
Paul Fisher is a Wellesley College American Studies professor and author of the recent Sargent biography, The Grand Affair. Far from the Gilded Age drawing rooms, he says the painter was also drawn to the transgressors and had the daring to paint them. And all at a time, not unlike today, when society was publicly wrestling with gender fluidity.
Newspapers of the time often described this as the maladie du siècle, the illness of the century. Women were out and about. Men were seen as more complicated, maybe more effete. So there was a lot of anxiety, and Sargent capitalizes on that.
He did it boldly in this portrait of a well-known Parisian, the gynecologist Dr. Posy. For its startling intimacy, the painting was never shown publicly in Paris in Sargent's lifetime.
He's wearing a blood red robe, and he's got cuffs and collar that are highly pleated and somewhat feminine. So Sargent is really sporting with gender here. Dr. Posy was a famous womanizer, but he had lots of queer friends in the circles in Paris, and Sargent was kind of gripped by this man's charisma, and you can see it in the portrait.
How intentional do you think he was in being provocative?
He has warring instincts. On the one hand, he's a very sort of shy, quiet, retiring man who loves his work. On the other hand, the provocation is part of his making a career for himself.
But provocation doesn't even begin to describe what Sargent did in 1884, when this portrait of the American-born Madame Pierre Gautreau was exhibited at the prestigious Paris Salon. She did not commission Sargent. Rather, he chased her.
Everybody in Paris wanted to make an image of Madame Gautreau. One other American artist described her as black as spades and white as milk, and she sort of glided across the floor.
But when the portrait was unveiled with Gautreau's revealing gown, one strap originally painted slipping down her shoulder, and her skin so white it looked lavender, society revolted.
One of Sargent's friends wrote that it was surrounded by shoals of jibing women. And also in the press, they say that it looks like her dress is about to fall down. They say that she looks like a corpse. She's so pale.
Gautreau was mortified and Sargent was singed. He later repainted the strap and found the experience bruising enough to leave Paris for London.
Sargent, when he sold it to the Metropolitan Museum in 1915, said, "I think it's one of the best things I have ever done." It's interesting, she sort of retreated from society, but then some years later had another portraitist paint her portrait, also in profile, also with one strap down.
And validating John Singer Sargent as both socially and fashion forward.
Fashion by Sargent is on display at the MFA through January 14th. Head to themfa.org for more info. That's it for tonight, but come back tomorrow for Talking Politics. Adam Riley and his panel will take up a rare win for Republicans in Tuesday's election, winning a seat in the state Senate. Plus CNN's decision to embed with Israeli forces in Gaza on the condition the military review all their footage and materials before they publish. That and more tomorrow at 7. I'm Tori Bedford. Thank you for watching. Good night.